I'm very far from politics, but as far as I know, China rose due to the help of the Russian Empire, then the USSR, and numerous contributions and loans from the USA. If I am wrong, correct me. It is now impossible not to recognize China's greatness and economic dominance. It is a production machine, the forefront of mankind in many industries. Help from other countries is good, but it is not the only reason why China has emerged as a leader. A very interesting story was leaked to the media in 2003. It is, as they say, hard to recognize where is truth and where is fiction. But the story is worth watching this video in its entirety. In 1950, China began to rise from its knees. Many millions of people, despite the low level of prosperity, worked for the benefit of future generations. Massively built factories, mines, roads, cities. Over the next 20 years, this country achieved impressive success and declared to the whole world its intention to become a great power. In 1966, the first landmark event occurred: the collapse of one of the largest mines in the country. About 100 miners were killed and another 16 were missing. Their bodies could not be found even months later. Relatives were told that all the miners were probably dead. But a real miracle happened. After 8 months, all 16 men returned to their families, and not without gifts. It turned out that each of them had quite a lot of uncut diamonds, sapphires, and emeralds with them. When asked by their loved ones, they replied that they had earned them. When they attempted to cash the stones for money, the authorities became interested in the miraculously returned miners. The stones were confiscated and the men were initially sentenced to execution. But then, they came to their senses and were sent to a military base. Why, you may ask? More on that later. In 1983, rock explosions were carried out during the construction of an underground tunnel. At some point, the workers overdid it with dynamite and a huge layer of soil collapsed. Surprisingly, a mysterious picture appeared before people: several floors of passageways hollowed out in the rock. Invited experts confirmed that such passages could not have been carved by water. They're man-made, except that humans had nothing to do with them. The tunneling project was scrapped, and the dungeons tried to be explored, but both groups were lost during the exploration. 2 months later, the men returned. According to their stories, there is a huge country underground with short, quaint little people. They grow lichens and mushrooms and hardly ever come to the surface. It wasn't just a small gang of mysterious inhabitants, but thousands. The people, lost in the passages, were discovered by a few underground dwellers and led a long time into the depths until a huge cave with a lake appeared. Around the lake in several dozen floors were dwarf dwellings. People were offered to stay underground or work for the good of the underground and return to the surface. The lost chose the second option. They had to work in the mines of low creatures for about a month and a half. According to the returned people, there are untold deposits of diamonds, sapphires, rubies, emeralds, and other stones at great depths underground. The next meeting took place in 2003. Again, the occasion was a sad disaster. A mine collapsed near the city of Jishi in Heilongjiang province. 13 miners died and 1 was missing. 5 years later, the missing Wang Hu returned. His return was hailed as a national miracle. Local journalists immediately found out where he lived and went to make a sensational report. And it was sensational indeed. Wang Hu spoke of a subterranean civilization of short creatures. The man called them the Khtan. He described these small people as gray creatures that looked like humans, but differed by 4-toed limbs, yellow eyes, and bulb-like head shape. They also communicate in an obscure language, but some of them can speak Chinese. According to Wang Hu's story, he woke up in a small room, with 6 Khotans around him, who treated the man for a long time. During the collapse of the mine, Wang Hu had lost a lot of blood, and according to all predictions, he simply could not survive. It was lucky that despite his injury, for some time he crawled and called for help. In the end, without waiting for help, the man lost consciousness. All this could be written off as fantasies of a survivor, but for 5 years, he had been living somewhere. And the most surprising thing is that the medical examination revealed the presence of scars from surgeries, both on the skin and internal organs. The medical records of the man stated that he had only 25 teeth before the tragedy, while the man who returned from the Kotanovs had all 32 teeth. The blood composition was also different. Saturation increased common diseases of minors, disturbed saturation, farsightedness, and a number of other chronic diseases, which, according to the medical booklet, the man had. It turns out that the Kots managed to cure not only the injuries received during the collapse of the mine, but also a number of diseases that cannot be cured even by modern medicine. But for this, Wang Hu had to work for 4 years in the mines of the Thonians. Besides, he helped to build the houses of these creatures. The Chinaman gave an interesting explanation about the lighting underground. The Khtan grow reddish plants that give off a negligible amount of light. However, during flowering, pollen flies out of the plants, which is the main source of light. The underground dwarfs take meticulous care of the plants, so they bloom all year round. In addition, mysterious bluish-white crystals emit light. There are some kind of tubes connected to them, perhaps analogous to our power supply system. It would seem that a Chinese man could be suspected of lying or insanity, but instead of placing the man in a mental institution, he was taken to a secret military base, and his relatives were offered a large sum of money from the state in favor of Wang Hu's lifetime contract in the service of the military. That same year, there were several public denials from the authorities. If it were mere fiction, the Chinese authorities hardly focused their attention on the Chinese miner story. Some researchers believe that our planet is indeed permeated with various tunnels, and at great depths dwell one or more civilizations. Apparently, the Tothanese are one of them. It is believed that the Chinese military has established contact with representatives of the civilization. As early as in the last century, the exchange of precious stones for the needs of underground dwellers began to take place. Thanks to this, the Chinese economy received an additional impetus for development, and the underground dwellers received some guarantees and maybe something else. What do you think about this story?